Hey guys, tonight we journey into the greasy, gritty, and often bizarre world of medieval junk food. No fast food chains, no vending machines, just a jumbled feast of crispy fish skins, brick hard honey cakes, and snacks so daring they make gas station sushi look elegant. Imagine yourself trudging through a muddy village square, dodging pigs, sidestepping horse droppings, and catching the smoky scent of something frying in pig fat. You squint through the haze, someone's ladling batter into a bubbling pot. A kid is gnawing on what might be a turnip tart. A monk sneaks a sip of ale from a crusty chunk of bread. It's culinary chaos, but this is dinner. Back then, you didn't have nutrition labels or expiration dates. You didn't even have napkins. You had fingers, questionable sanitation, and cravings. Whether you were a noble with honey-drizzled wafers or a peasant chewing dried fish skin, your snacks told stories of class, creativity, and often sheer desperation. You probably won't survive this snack menu, but it'll be fun trying. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and what time it is where you are. I want to know where my fellow night owls are tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet are sore, your hands smell like firewood and garlic. You've worked 12 hours tending fields, gutting fish, or copying prayers by candlelight, and now it's market day. The village stalls are stacked with foods you can actually afford. And no, it's not roast swan or peacock in almond sauce. It's humble, hearty, and sometimes horrifying. The most popular snack, apple fritters. Crunchy on the outside, gooey on the inside. And fried in pig fat older than your landlord's secrets. But we'll get there. First, just take in the scene. A juggler's flipping knives near a tavern, while a piglet snorts hopefully by a stall, dripping in honey cakes. A woman is hawking turnip pies with a chant you swear rhymes with die. There's music shouting and the clatter of tankards against wood. You're starving and everything smells questionable but amazing. Food preservation isn't exactly medieval Europe's strong suit. So things are either dried, smoked salted, or dunked in enough sugar to embalm a small goat. The goal? Eat before it rots. Or better yet, eat what's already halfway there and pretend it's aged. Fermentation is a lifestyle. Now, while nobles dined on roasted heron and eel in saffron sauce, common folk mastered the art of culinary scrappiness. Leftover ale soaked stale bread in it. Fish guts fried a skin. Even blood became a meatball. Waste not, want not, or in this case, want lots, and waste everything else. Historians still argue whether these snacks were treats or simply desperation disguised with honey. But one thing's clear: medieval munchies weren't boring. They were weird, wonderful, and walked the line between yum and yikes with reckless abandon. Take ale-soaked bread, for instance. It wasn't just soggy toast, it was a warm, comforting, slightly alcoholic sponge that soaked up your cold, hard day. Or cheese curds, those squeaky little clumps of joy that bounced when you dropped them and squeaked when you chewed them. Medieval popcorn, essentially. Then there's blood pudding balls. Yes, you heard that right. Pig's blood oats and fat rolled into balls and fried. They weren't for the faint-hearted. but they kept soldiers warm and peasants full. And bizarrely, some people genuinely like them. Bless their taste buds. And wafers. Not the modern chocolate kind. These were ultra-thin discs, pressed with holy symbols sold outside churches, and eaten like sacred Pringles. Fragile, flavorless, and the closest you'd get to eating paper on purpose. But hey, they were kind of holy and definitely crunchy. The church actually played a big role in snack life. Markets often clustered around cathedrals, especially on feast days when the fasting rules loosened and vendors made a killing. You'd go confess your sins and exit into a smorgasbord of eel pies, syruped fruit, and fennel seeds dipped in sugar. Quirky fact for you, some folks believed that candied fennel seeds could purify your breath and your soul. Double-duty mints. Unfortunately, they were also known to break teeth. Nothing like losing a molar in the name of holiness. Of course, most snacks were judged not just by taste, but by how well they traveled. That's why meat pasties, basically the medieval Hot Pocket, were genius. A thick crust kept the juicy meat safe and your fingers cleanish. Sometimes bakers even stamped initials into the dough so workers wouldn't steal each other's lunches. Imagine labeling your Hot Pocket with medieval calligraphy. And dried fruits. Oh, they were the elite's candy. Imported dates, sticky figs, raisins. So sweet they could stop your heart. They looked fancy, tasted even fancier, and stuck to your teeth like a vengeful ghost. The downside, seeds. So many seeds, and absolutely no floss. Yet even the weirdest snacks had staying power. Honey cakes hard as bricks lasted weeks. Fried fish skin became the poor man's chips. And turnips kept pretending to be dessert long before it was socially acceptable. In short, medieval snack culture was a wild mix of necessity, invention, and let's be honest, a total disregard for arteries. But it was also community, gathering around fires, sharing scraps and sweets, and finding joy in a crispy fritter or sticky fig even if you weren't sure what it was. You pull your cloak tighter, the fire's warm on your cheeks. Someone hands you a piping hot fritter, and for a second, everything mud hunger lice fades into the background. Welcome to the world of medieval munchies. You bite into the apple fritter, and yep, it's just as chaotic as you hoped. The outer crust crunches like a potato chip soaked in lard that's been bubbling since sunrise. Inside, a sliver of apple, so soft it might have once been fruit, floating in a batter laced with ale. Not the good stuff either. This is flat leftover tavern brew, with just enough fizz to feel like regret. These little disasters were the medieval donut's mischievous cousin. No glaze, no sprinkles. Just yeast desperation and someone's stolen apples chopped fine to make them stretch. And honestly, you want 3 more. Back then, apples weren't the pristine grocery store varieties you know. They were smaller, tougher, and suspiciously tart. And since most peasants didn't have their own orchards, let's just say, borrowing apples was common practice. Climb a noble's tree, grab a few, and run before the dogs noticed. If you're lucky, you end up with enough for fritters. If not, well, turnips it is. The batter. It was a glorious mess. Flour ale, maybe an egg, if you were rich or could sweet talk a chicken. Dip your stolen apple chunks in, toss them into sizzling pig fat, and boom, instant medieval street food. The fat was rarely fresh, and often reused so many times. It had its own life story. If it could talk, it would scream. Historians still argue whether these fritters were reserved for fairs and feast days, or eaten regularly by those who could afford a bit of flour and oil. Some records suggest they were carnival food, a once-in-a-while delight handed out during festivals. Others claim they were an everyday indulgence provided your stomach was brave and your teeth expendable. And speaking of brave, these things weren't just sweet. They came with risk. Remember, medieval kitchens had no thermometers. That fritter could be raw in the middle or hotter than the forge at the blacksmith's. Bite too soon and you're nursing a tongue blister with cold cider and shame. But when they hit that sweet spot magic, you're not just eating a fritter, you're part of something. A communal ritual. Village kids would race through muddy streets to grab them off platters. Bakers sometimes sold them at tavern doors, shouting, "Hot, hot, get it," while it burns you as they flung them into the air like edible throwing stars. In some places, they even spiced them. Cinnamon if they could get it, cloves if they were showing off. Imported spices cost a small fortune, so finding one in your fritter meant the baker either liked you or made a mistake they hoped you wouldn't notice. Either way, chew slowly. Here's a quirky fact. In certain parts of England and France, fritters were associated with pre-Lenten feasts like Fat Tuesday, the final sugar-fueled hurrah before 40 days of bland repentance. People would fry up everything they could before the fasting began, and fritters became the greasy crown jewel. Your last dance with decadence before boiled beans took over. Even monasteries got in on the action. Some records show monks making fritters during special celebrations. Which raises the obvious question, what do you call a monk with a deep fryer? Answer blessed and dangerous. Over time, apple fritters evolved. In Italy, they became frittelle. In France, beignets de pomme. And while the medieval versions were rough around the edges, literally, they were often full of jagged batter spurs that could double as weapons. They set the stage for the modern donut. Just don't expect icing. The only glaze you'd find in 1300s Europe was the look in someone's eyes after their third mug of cider. And speaking of cider, that was the fritter's best friend. Not wine too fancy, not beer too bitter, but a good cloudy apple cider. That was the pairing of champions. Together, they soothed your bones and quieted the stomach growls echoing through your ribcage. Bonus, the alcohol helped distract from any minor food poisoning. Of course, not everyone loved apple fritters. Some nobles called them peasant trifles, too greasy and too common for refined palates. One anonymous scribe even wrote that fritters made the air reek of taverns and toil. Rude, but also kind of accurate. Still, fritters stuck around. They were fast-filling and slightly festive. You could make a batch with whatever scraps you had. And in a world where dinner often meant boiled weeds or plain bread, that little burst of crispy sweetness that was worth its weight in stolen apples. You watch a kid across the square hold up his fritter like a trophy. He's got sugar on his nose and grease on his sleeves. Behind him, the baker is already ladling out the next batch, the batter, hissing like dragons in the pot. You grab another, this one even crispier, and take a bite. It crunches, it burns, and then sweetness. Tart apple bitter ale, a whisper of spice. You lean back against a stall mouth full of fritter and smoke, and for a second you forget all about taxes, blisters, and that one chicken who keeps chasing you around your yard. Life isn't easy, but it's fried. And right now, that's enough. Your fingers are sticky with fritter grease. And before you can wipe them clean, someone nudges you toward the next stall, a humble, squeaky little treasure trove. A woman with flour on her nose and arms, like bread loaves, hands you a cloth pouch, warm and slightly squishy. Inside cheese curds. Unapologetically weird, squeaky cheese curds. They're not elegant. They're not even fully cheese. But they're here for you, dependable and oddly comforting, like the medieval popcorn you never knew you needed. Bite down and squeak. That's right, real literal squeaking. The fresher the curds, the more they squeal against your teeth like tiny mice in protest. It's not a bug. It's a feature. In fact, that squeak is how you know they haven't gone too far into the weird cheese territory yet. Made by curdling milk with rennet and letting the solids separate. These chunks were the in-between phase on cheese's long journey to aged glory. Some folks dried them out into harder forms, others melted them into hot meals. But in this stall, you're getting them raw, fresh, and jiggly. They wobble slightly when you shake the pouch. It's unsettling. It's perfect. Now medieval refrigeration was not a thing. Unless you live near an ice house or happen to have a castle cellar, most dairy went south faster than a goose in winter. But curds were the loophole. Eat them fast, eat them often, and don't ask too many questions. Historians still argue whether cheese curds were intended as a primary food or a happy byproduct, something to nibble on while the real cheese matured in a back room. But either way, curds became a staple in markets, abbeys, and households where cows roamed and hunger lingered. Quirky fact for your pouch of squeak: some monks would bless the curds before consuming them just in case. Because in an age of foodborne illness, divine intervention couldn't hurt. Also, curds had a reputation for balancing the humors, especially when paired with ale. That's medieval, for they won't kill you probably, and portability a huge plus. These little blobs traveled well in pouches, wrapped in cloth, or even stuffed into hollowed-out bread rolls. Soldiers carried them on marches. Pilgrims packed them for the road. And if you were lucky, a generous host might sprinkle them over a slab of hot porridge culinary chaos. Sure, but protein-packed and surprisingly tasty. Kids adored them. Not just for the taste, but because they were fun. Toss them in the air, squish them between fingers, see how far you could flick one before your mother shouted. In a world without toys, cheese curds did double duty. And yes, they came in flavors. Occasionally you'd find curds spiced with herbs, thyme, sage, even a dash of mustard seed if someone was feeling posh. But most often, they were plain, salty, slightly sour. The kind of snack you didn't have to think about. Just reach in and pop another. In noble households, curds were sometimes served alongside fancier cheeses as part of elaborate platters. Think medieval charcuterie, but with more pewter and fewer Instagram filters. You'd find slices of honeycomb, clusters of grapes, and maybe a few almonds to round it out. But the curds, they anchored the plate, humble yet essential. There's a story, probably apocryphal, but still delightful, of a knight returning from crusade, only to be gifted a pouch of curds by a peasant girl. He allegedly thanked her with a poem and a very awkward curtsy. Romance was strange in those days. So was lunch. Back in the village, you nibble another curd. This one's firmer, like it's been waiting its turn. You toss it in the air and catch it without spilling your cider. Behind you, a farmer and his son argue over whose batch squeaks louder. There's laughter, there's chewing, and there's that undeniable sense of shared snack joy. It's not glamorous, but it is honest. No trickery, no gilded dishes, just a bit of milk magic and muscle. Cheese curds are the sidekick of medieval snacks, always around, rarely the star, but absolutely essential. Like the potato before its glow up, or the rice grain in every pot. And sure, they weren't made with gloves or hairnets. Hygiene was a concept, not a practice. But somehow, against all odds, these squishy morsels endured. You finish the last curd, wipe your hands on your tunic, and glance back at the stall. The woman is already doling out more, smiling like she knows the secret. And maybe she does. Maybe in a world of fire, frost, and famine, it's the little things, the warm pouch, the squeak, the salt that keep you going. You take a deep breath. The market smells of bread smoke and just a hint of something pickled. Ahead, another stall glows with the promise of something flaky hot and possibly dangerous. But for now, your belly's got a friend in the cheese curds. You wander down the row of stalls, belly pleasantly squeaky from the cheese curds, until something catches your eye, or maybe it's your nose. There's a sweetness in the air, but something earthy too. A scent that says dessert, but also garden harvest that's seen things. You inch closer and spotted a stack of steaming, oddly shaped pastries, each one the pale gold of overcooked ambition. Turnip pie. That's right, turnips in pie as dessert. You hesitate because somewhere deep in your modern soul a warning light blinks. But this is the Middle Ages. Sugar is scarce, hope is scarcer, and sometimes you have to lie to yourself to survive. So you grab one, warm, crumbly, and dusted with, is that actual honey? You take a bite. It's sweet, starchy, and somehow oddly compelling. Like if carrot cake lost a bet and had to wear a vegetable disguise. Turnips were the potato before potatoes crashed the party. They grew in miserable soil, survived frost, and could feed an army of peasants through the bleakest winters. Not glamorous, not beloved, but always there. Like a lumpy purple friend you didn't ask for, but couldn't shake. And yet somewhere along the line, someone looked at this sad root and thought, you know what this needs? A crust. Add a bit of egg. A drizzle of honey, if the bees were in a good mood, and maybe some spices if you were lucky. And voila, turnip pie. Dessert, or dare. Historians still argue whether turnip pies were considered true sweets or just meals pretending to be fun. Some say they were served at the end of meals in poorer homes, the closest thing to a finale most peasants got. Others suggest they were everyday staples, practical, filling, and capable of being sweetened just enough to feel like a treat. Quirky fact in some monastic kitchens, Turnips were carved and roasted as a form of penance food meals, so bland they made you focus on your sins. But add honey and egg, and suddenly they're morally ambiguous comfort food. The crust wasn't flaky like a modern pie. It was thick sometimes, chewy occasionally, closer to hardtack than pastry. But that was by design. The crust had to hold up to rough handling hot ovens and hungry hands. Some bakers even used them as edible lunchboxes, stuffing the filling inside and sealing it shut like a little vegetable vault. You bite again. The texture's not quite smooth. More like mashed and forgotten. There's a bit of chew, a whisper of spice, and something nostalgic. It tastes like trying your best, like a peasant kid's birthday treat that says, "This is what love tastes like when flour is rationed." Turnips didn't stop at pie either. They were grated into pancakes, baked into breads, even boiled and sweetened into a kind of primitive jam. In fact, when sugar ran low, which was always, people turned to honey-dried fruits, or just sheer imagination to make root vegetables feel fancy. The pies were shaped in all sorts of ways. Some round, some folded like turnovers, some looking more like swollen dumplings than anything dessert-like. It wasn't about appearance, it was about function. Feed the belly. Trick the tongue. Keep hope alive one root at a time. And let's not pretend nobles were above this. Sure, they had fruit tarts and imported almonds, but when times got tight, even lords leaned on turnips. There are records of royal kitchens preparing savory and sweet turnip dishes, especially during Lent or bad harvest years. The trick was drowning them in enough honey and spice to forget the root beneath. You pass a small boy, with one in each hand, crumbs dusting his chin. He grins toothless and triumphant, and offers you a bite of his second pie. You politely decline one moral compromise at a time. Nearby, a nun is selling Lenten pies, which are basically turnip pies, minus the joy. No egg, no butter, just turnip, flour, and prayer. She nods solemnly as you pass her apron, smudged with flour and piety. You tuck the last bit of your pie into your mouth and chew slowly. It's not bad. It's not great. It's earnest. And somehow, in this gritty, smoke-filled marketplace, that counts for a lot. Because in the world of medieval snacks, you take your wins where you can get them. Sometimes that win is a candied fig. Sometimes it's fried fish skin. And sometimes it's a turnip pretending to be a cupcake, with a crust that doubles as a plate, and a filling that warms your belly even as your brand says, "But why?" As you dust off your hands, a sudden gust of wind rattles the canvas stall behind you. The smell of roasting meat hits your nose, rich and buttery, laced with herbs and mystery. You turn your head and spot a baker pulling something heavy and steaming from a stone oven. The pies are thicker, meatier, and stamped with floury initials. A different kind of hand pie. One you don't have to pretend is sweet, but you'll always remember the turnip. Humble, odd, kind of lovable, like a bedtime story your stomach doesn't quite believe. The scent of roasting meat pulls you in like a spell herby rich, with just the right edge of something singed. You weave through the crowd, duck under a hanging string of sausages, and there they are, the mighty meat pasties. Not dainty, not delicate, just fat, flour-packed fists of food. These are medieval hot pockets baked hard enough to withstand a battlefield, or at least a week in a saddlebag. You step closer. The baker is stacking them like bricks. His hands moving fast, the crusts puffing steam where they split. You pick one up. It's warm, heavy, and stamped near the seam with a messy J. Ownership branding, not decorative. These things were serious property. In mines, fields, and workshops across Europe, workers would carve or press their initials into the dough before baking. That way, no one else could claim your lunch without starting a fight. You break the pasty open. Steam rushes out. The filling is a mash of minced meat, maybe beef, maybe something vaguely poultry-shaped, and root vegetables that gave up weeks ago. A splash of pepper, if someone was feeling generous, and a thick, chewy crust browned with egg. Or, let's be honest, whatever grease was closest to the fire. It's not gourmet, it's survival in pastry form. The genius of the meat pasty is in its design, that thick outer crust. It wasn't always meant to be eaten. In some places, especially among miners, it acted like a handle. You'd eat the filling chuck, the dirty soot-covered crust, and move on, like a built-in wrapper medieval style. Zero sanitation, zero waste, unless you cared about crust, which many didn't. Historians still argue whether the crust-tossing habit started for cleanliness or superstition. Some believed the crust could absorb evil spirits from the mine. Tossing it was a way of keeping the ghosts happy. Others say that's nonsense and it was just about not eating soot. Either way, crust got the short end of the stick. Quirky fact in Cornwall pasties were once made with half sweet, half savory fillings. Meat on one side, jam on the other. Dessert and dinner in one sealed dough tube. Medieval innovation at its weirdest. Bakers made a living off these. You could sell them from stalls, wheelbarrows, or even door to door. They were portable, reliable, and versatile. Fillings changed depending on what you had: pork, lamb, pigeon, or some mystery meat you were better off not identifying. And if meat was scarce, mushrooms, peas, or barley did the trick. Nobles had their version too, of course. Bigger, fancier, stuffed with game birds and exotic spices. Swans, venison, even eel made appearances. The crusts were golden sculpted, sometimes shaped like animals themselves. But at their core, still pasties, still pocket food. You watch as the baker flips one over, stamps it with a B, and slides it onto a wooden tray already crowded with initials. It's like a savory yearbook. You sit on a low bench, pasty in hand, and take another bite. The meat is rich, the vegetables soft, the spices barely hanging on, but it works. It fills you in that stubborn, lasting way, like armor for your stomach. And somehow, in a world where so much is uncertain, this little brick of meat and crust feels like stability. A group of children nearby squabble over a dropped half pasty. One wins, triumphantly licking the filling off the ground side before scampering off. You grimace, then shrug. Medieval 5-second rule, maybe. A cart trundles past piled high with half-burnt pasties, the rejects. Still warm, still edible. Probably half price. A man with a limp buys 5, tucks them into a cloth bag, and nods like he's just secured his next 3 meals. You've got to respect it. The pasty doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. It doesn't flake. It doesn't flirt. It survives. Just like you. The crust is now cold and starting to crack. You consider whether to eat it or not. You nibble a corner. Tough dry with a hint of soot. Yeah, maybe the ghosts can have this one. Another baker sets up beside the first. His pasties are smaller, crispier, and smell faintly of mint. Experimental. You make a note to try one if you don't fall into a food coma first. You lean back, full fingers, greasy eyes, squinting against the firelight. Around you, villagers bite into their pasties with familiar rhythm, some smiling, some not. The sky is dimming now, dusk settling over thatched rooftops and crooked chimneys. Tomorrow someone will invent the calzone. Centuries later, the microwave dinner. But tonight in this muddy square, with smoke in your hair and meat in your belly, the meat pasty is king, and maybe that's all you need. A hand pie, a hot filling, a crust you may or may not believe in. Because in a world without cutlery, without lunch breaks, without certainty, this is the kind of food that remembers you've got to eat to fight another day. You've barely brushed the last crumbs of pasty from your tunic. When something delicate tickles your nose, sweet, spicy, and sharp enough to make your eyes flutter. You follow the scent like a cartoon villager floating forward as if on invisible waves until you arrive at a tiny stall tucked between two barrels of pickled onions. No grease, no smoke, just a single bowl of what looks like tiny white seeds coated in sugar. Candied fennel seeds, or as one nearby merchant is calling them, breath mints for people with medieval mouths. You reach for a pinch and pop a few into your mouth. They crunch softly between your teeth, the sugar coating dissolving into a floral sweetness. Then pow, a burst of anise-like zing, like someone cleaned your tongue with a licorice whip. Your mouth is confused. Your sinuses are applauding. These weren't just snacks. These were noble refreshments delicate enough for castle banquets, small enough to fit into a velvet pouch, and dangerous enough to chip a tooth if you weren't careful. They were the after-dinner mint of the medieval world, sweet little bombs of spice and crunch. Of course, sugar wasn't something you just casually bought at the corner stall. This was pre-industrial Europe, where sugar came from, cane grown in faraway lands, processed by someone who definitely didn't enjoy their job, and transported over treacherous sea routes. By the time it arrived in a noble household, it was worth its weight in precious metals. So what did nobles do with their sugar? They used it to candy everything in sight. Fennel seeds, coriander anise, almonds if it fit in your mouth, and didn't protest too loudly. It got dipped dried and declared a delicacy. That tiny dish of candied seeds sitting in front of you, that was social currency. A mark of wealth, a conversation starter. Historians still argue whether these seeds were served primarily for breath freshening or digestion. The answer is likely both. Medieval diners knew a thing or two about complicated meals. When you're eating eel pie with a side of pickled turnips, followed by a slab of honey cake, you need something to cut through the aftermath. Enter candied fennel seeds. Quirky fact. Some hosts believed the seeds could ward off evil spirits, or at least discourteous conversation. offer a handful to a chatty guest, and suddenly they were too busy chewing to interrupt. Elegant and strategic, they were usually served at the end of a meal, along with spiced wine or a final nibble of dried fruit. Sometimes they came in decorative boxes carved from bone or wood to be passed around like tiny edible secrets. Pop one and chew slowly and smile, without offending the person next to you, ideally. You notice a woman beside you with her own tiny tin fingering it like a prized possession. She offers you another pinch, and you take it careful not to spill a single sugar-coated jewel. They clink against your teeth like pebbles. Sweet, spicy, refreshing, strange. The seller, an elderly man with a mustache like two haystacks in a windstorm, is muttering something about noble teeth and sugar taxes. You lean in. He's complaining that only the rich can afford the good sugar, the kind that doesn't taste like it's been stored in someone's boot. He might be joking. He might not. Of course, not all candied seeds were made equal. Some were just fennel, rolled in coarse sugar, stored in damp cellars, and served at weddings because no one could afford cake. Others were prepared with precision, triple-dipped dried in the sun and infused with rose water or orange blossom. Those were the seeds of emperors. Yours are probably somewhere in between. And don't let the sweetness fool you. These things were weapons of dental destruction. Medieval dental hygiene was aspirational. People brushed with frayed twigs, rinsed with wine or chewed herbs. But sugar was sugar, and too much of it led to what the monks called toothworm, a delightful catch-all term for anything that made your teeth fall out. Still, people kept eating them. Because when you lived in a world of firewood teeth and root vegetable despair, a little sweet crunch could make everything better, even if you had to suck it through the gap where your molar used to be. You pop another seed in your mouth, letting it melt slowly this time. The background hum of the market grows softer. A lute player begins to strum nearby. Children run past laughing, scattering breadcrumbs for the pigeons. The air smells faintly of cinnamon and wet wool, and for a moment everything feels light, fancy even, like you're not standing in a muddy square surrounded by livestock and economic anxiety, but at a banquet in silk, nodding politely as you cleanse your palate after roast goose and honey-glazed walnuts. Then someone trips over a chicken and reality returns. You finish your handful and thank the merchant who tips his hat and begins hawking his next customer with a dramatic, guaranteed to sweeten your breath or end your relationships. You move on teeth, tingling eyes scanning for what comes next. There's a sweet still lingering on your tongue, but your stomach's already thinking ahead. Something more filling, maybe. Something baked, brick-like, possibly weaponized. But that's another snack for another step. You stroll onward, crunching the last of the fennel seeds between your teeth, when the next stall stops you cold, not with fragrance, but with sheer density. A tower of golden brown slabs rises like a desert fortress, thick and squared each piece, looking like it could double as a doorstop or a blunt weapon. Welcome to the honey cake medieval snack, or medieval masonry, depending on who you ask. You poke one. It doesn't budge. A baker smirks and hands you a slice. It's warm, barely yielding at the edges, and smells like roasted grain and beeswax. You bite down. The crust fights you, the inside dense, sweet, chewy in that is this food or fiberboard kind of way. Your jaw clicks once, twice. Victory. Honey cakes were the old world's protein bar dessert slab and celebratory loaf, all rolled into one indestructible package. No frosting, no fluff. Just flour, honey, maybe some spices if you were lucky, and enough staying power to survive a siege. They weren't cakes in the modern sense, no eggs, whipped into clouds, no layers, no icing flowers. These were honest muscular cakes, built to last, made with grainy flour and sticky honey baked until firm and chewy. Some versions were so solid, they needed to be sliced with a small saw or left in soup until they surrendered. Historians still argue whether these were made more for taste or preservation. A well-made honey cake could last weeks, even months without spoiling. That made them perfect for travel war campaigns or stuffing into the larder just in case. Bonus, no need for refrigeration. Just wrap it in cloth, stuff it in a barrel, and hope no one mistakes it for a brick. Quirky fact. In some places, honey cakes were wedding gifts, a literal slab of affection. If your cake arrived and could dent a table, that was seen as a sign of generosity, also durability, because love like honey cake should survive a long winter. You chew slower now, getting used to the rhythm. There's a warmth to it, a slow release of sugar and spice. It's not showy, but it's honest, comforting in a hard hug from a wooden chair kind of way. The baker offers you a second slice, this one with slivered nuts pressed into the top. Almonds, maybe. They add a crunch, an extra chew factor. You nod in gratitude. Around you, others are doing the same. Soldiers, children, merchants. They all eat honey cake like it's a food group. A boy nearby uses one as a plate for his cheese curds. Another ties a string around his and slings it over his shoulder like a hammer. You swear you see a girl use a slice to squash a bug. Medieval honey cake was also a bit of a shapeshifter. Some were round, others square. Some made with rye, others with barley. Some baked in open hearths, others steamed in cloth-wrapped bundles. The only constant honey, lots of it. Enough to sweeten your mouth and your mood, even if you hadn't bathed in days. In monasteries, monks baked honey cakes as part of feast day preparations. These weren't for every day. They were special, sacred even, offered to guests, shared among brothers, and sometimes hoarded under pillows when someone got too attached. And nobles. Oh, they had honey cakes too. Fancier, of course, flavored with imported spices, studded with fruit glazed to a shine. But even the rich respected the cake's staying power. When you've got a dessert that can survive a cross-country horse ride, you don't mess with it. You take another bite. This one's softer, warmed by the midday sun. It melts slowly, releasing honey hints of cinnamon, maybe even a whisper of ginger. It's quiet joy. The kind that doesn't explode with flavor but lingers, hums. You glance down the lane. A cart is being wheeled in, stacked with honey cakes shaped like animals. Bears, birds, fish, playful interpretations of a snack that usually comes in block or chunk. The vendor waves. Festival edition, he shouts. Sweet and symbolic. Apparently in some regions, Honey cakes were shaped according to holiday themes. Springtime lambs, harvest cornucopias, death feast skulls, all deeply edible and weirdly festive. You finish your slice and feel full. Not bloated, not buzzing, just anchored, like your stomach got a warm, honey-drenched handshake. And honestly, that's enough. You nod to the baker, who winks and returns to stacking his cake wall. Around you, the market keeps pulsing. Laughter loots footsteps over straw, the scent of yeast and earth. Your journey's only halfway, but already your pockets are sticky, and your soul is a little sweeter. And ahead, something flickers in a shallow pan oil heat, and something thin and crinkled. A new smell, a new crunch. But for now, you sit with your honey cake. One solid slice of survival. Built for battles, baked for joy. You peel yourself off the bench knees, creaking like old church doors, and wander toward the source of that new scent, a crispy, salty whisper in the wind. It's sharper than pasty steam, lighter than honey cake sweetness. As you get closer, the smell locks in fried fish skin. Yep, not fish, just the skin. Flaky, golden, and curling into delicate crisps in a battered iron pan. It shouldn't work. But your stomach has other opinions. A woman stands over the pan face lined by sun, and smoke flipping translucent ribbons of fish skin in sizzling oil. She catches your eye and grins. Crunchy like autumn leaves, she says, offering you one on a scrap of rough cloth. You take it. It's warm, still glistening, and thinner than parchment. You bite in. It crackles like dry kindling dissolves into a rush of salt fat and river memory. Your face does that involuntary squint, the kind that says, "That was weirder than expected, but I'd eat it again." In medieval Europe, fish was everywhere. If you lived near a river stream or coast, you fished. And if you fished, you learned quickly to use every scrap bones, heads, tails, and yes, skin. The meat went into stews, pies, and preservation pots. The skin fried into budget chips before chips were a thing. This wasn't noble food. You wouldn't see fish skin crisps laid out on a lord's platter next to candied nuts. No, this was peasant power snacking. The kind of thing a farmer might pack in a pouch, or a soldier chew while marching through muck. Fast energy, maximum crunch, minimum waste. Historians still argue whether fried fish skin was a daily staple or more of a market day indulgence. It depended on how much oil you had, how fresh the catch was, and whether your frying pan had survived the winter. Quirky fact: in some coastal villages, fish skin was fried not just for eating, but for trading. Crisp, salty slivers were bartered for herbs cloth or even the occasional baked good. A kind of proto-chip economy running on crunch and grease. You pop another piece. This one has a little more char, a bitter edge that pairs weirdly well with the salt. It sticks to the roof of your mouth before cracking apart. Oddly satisfying, disturbingly addictive. The woman fans her fire with a reed fan. Beside her, a basket holds raw skins, waiting their turn. She tells you she gets them from her cousin, a fisherman who cleans trout at dawn and saves the skins in a leather sack until market day. They don't look like much, she says, but they make the children smile. And it's true. A trio of grubby kids are nearby trading skin crisps like coins. One has a broken sliver in his hair. Another's rubbing one against a stone to make it sharper. You silently hope they don't throw them at the chickens. Back in monasteries, fish was a Lenten staple, meat-free but still nourishing. Monks ever thrifty found use for every part. Some even boiled fish skins into gelatin or dried them into sheets for preservation. But frying, that was the indulgent cousin, a treat slipped in on feast days or when discipline lapsed. You sit cross-legged near the pan. The fire crackles. A breeze carries smoke and river breath past your nose. It's not glamorous, but it's homey, honest. Fried fish skin is the kind of snack you eat with your fingers, then wipe them on your tunic without shame. Another customer steps up, a grizzled man with a cart full of carrots. He buys a small pouch, nods in approval, and tucks it into his belt like treasure. No parchment wrap, no ceremony. Just salt, oil, and crunch. You ask the vendor how long the crisps keep. She shrugs. Depends how greedy you are, she says. Most don't last past sundown. Fair. A small dog darts under her table, snatching a fallen piece. It crunches it in one bite tail, wagging like a flag of triumph. You raise an eyebrow. The vendor laughs. He's my official taster. You savor one final crisp. The edges are curled, the center crackly, and for a split second, you taste something smoky sweet, like the memory of a riverbank campfire. Fried fish skin, not fancy, not fashionable, but absolutely unforgettable. You rise again, belly satisfied, lips salty, and glance toward the next stall. A woman is stirring something in a mug, thick, steamy, and unmistakably soaked. Bread, floating in ale. A proto-French toast if there ever was one. But for now, you linger in the afterglow of salt and crackle. Because somehow, against all odds, someone turned fish waste into a moment of crispy joy. You follow the scent of malt and yeast until it wraps around you like a damp wool blanket. There, nestled between two barrels and a rack of drying herbs, sits a squat old man, ladling steaming mush into wooden mugs. You blink. Bread in a mug. He hands one to you with a grin that says, "Don't ask, just sip." You peer inside. Floating in a pool of warm, cloudy ale is a chunk of soggy bread. It looks like a sad sponge having a crisis, but it smells surprisingly cozy. You take a hesitant sip. The ale is flat, but hearty sour around the edges, and the bread old crusty probably. Yesterday's is now soft-soaked and weirdly comforting, like breakfast in a tavern and an apology all at once. Welcome to ale-soaked bread, medieval comfort food in its sloppiest form. Back then, no one wasted bread. It was sacred, symbolic. The foundation of every meal and the thing people swore by when making oaths. So when it got old and hard enough to chisel a name into, you didn't throw it away. You soaked it in ale, cider, milk, broth, anything that brought it back to life and made it chewable without risking your remaining teeth. This wasn't dessert, and it wasn't quite soup. It was somewhere in between a belly filler a mood settler, the kind of meal you eat when you've worked 12 hours and all your teeth hurt from yesterday's honey cake. Historians still argue whether ale-soaked bread was primarily a breakfast, a sick day meal, or just poor man's pudding. Some called it sops, and variations show up in manuscripts from across Europe. Sops in broth, sops in wine, even sops in meat drippings if you were living wild. It was medieval culinary improv. Start with bread, end with regret or bliss. Quirky fact: some monasteries served ale-soaked bread to guests as a show of humility. Welcome to our house, here's some beer mush. It was oddly polite and filling, and way cheaper than offering them eggs. You chew slowly. The texture is soft but not mushy, like French toast without the egg or porridge with ambition. The ale adds a tang almost fruity, and there's a note of spice maybe someone snuck in a clove. This isn't just salvage food. It's intentional, a kind of culinary hug. The man gestures to a board, showing different flavors. Apple ale with dark rye barley beer, with nut bread. Even a feast version, soaked in spiced cider, and topped with grated dried fruit. Suddenly this doesn't feel like leftovers. It feels like a trend. Around you others are sipping from their mugs, slurping bits of bread with spoonless grace. One woman dips a hunk of cheese into her sop, then bites it clean in two. Another stirs hers with a twig before drinking it, like a warm milkshake. Everyone has a method, none of them elegant. This meal has stamina. It sticks to your ribs. And best of all, it uses up what you already have: stale bread, weak ale, and a few hopeful seasonings. No need for firewood or fine knives, just a mug and a moment. You glance into the dregs of your cup. A few soggy crumbs float like little lifeboats. You sip them down. Oddly satisfying. The vendor offers you a refill, but you decline. Not because it wasn't good, but because there's something else across the lane. A noble-looking woman is holding a goblet filled with deep red liquid and dipping what looks suspiciously like more bread into it. But this bread is lighter, more delicate. The wine is spiced. Sops again. But this time for the elite. Before you go, the vendor pats your shoulder. Sometimes he says you don't need a feast. Just warm bread, old ale, and a seat near the fire. And he's right. This is the kind of snack that doesn't care what your title is. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't boast. But it fills the gap between cold and comfort, between hunger and happiness. You tuck the mug away, licking the last drop from your lip, and turn towards the noble's table. Another sop awaits, fancier, sure, but still just bread and liquid. And that's the secret of medieval snacks. Whether you were a plowman with one crust or a lord with gold-plated spoons, eventually you ended up dipping something into something else. For flavor, for comfort, for survival. You step closer to the noble's table, drawn by the shimmer of red wine and the delicate dunking motion of velvet-gloved fingers. This isn't ale and crust. This is something silkier, something performative. You watch as a chunk of fine white bread soaks in a goblet, then disappears into the mouth of a woman with more rings than knuckles. This is wine-soaked bread, or as the nobles like to call it, sops in wine. You sidle and act casual, and a servant distracted or merciful offers you a goblet, deep red spiced warm. A chunk of bread floats in the middle like a buoy lost at sea. You sniff. The wine's been mulled, cinnamon, clove, maybe a whisper of dried orange. The bread is delicate lighter than anything a peasant would ever call daily. You lift the goblet and let the assop slide into your mouth. It's soggy, sure, but the kind of soggy that feels intentional. The wine clings to the bread like perfume on a scarf. It tastes of spice, sugar, and mild delusion. This is noble nonsense, but it's glorious nonsense. Wine-soaked bread was how the upper crust played with their food. It wasn't about sustenance, it was about elegance, ceremony, a dainty finale to a banquet or a conversation piece at court. You didn't just eat it, you performed it. Tilt your goblet, pinch this up, dab your lips with a linen cloth. Try not to slurp. Historians still argue whether esops in wine were dessert or palate cleanser. Some believe they were intended to settle the stomach after a rich meal. Others insist they were early forms of dessert, proto-bread puddings, without the baking. Either way, they required three things: good bread-spiced wine, and the illusion that you weren't just eating soup-ified leftovers. Quirky fact, some banquet halls hired SOP servers, young pages, whose only job was to prepare sops for nobles. Bread had to be cut precisely, wine had to be warm, never boiling. And if the sop disintegrated too early, scandal, you sip again. This time you chew slower. The bread is falling apart now, but the flavors linger, heady, rich, almost romantic. You glance around. Nobles laugh gently, flicking crumbs from sleeves. One older man is clearly just drinking the wine and pretending to eat the bread. And that's the thing, sops weren't just food. They were theater. You could read the room by how someone handled theirs. Did they gulp? They were new money. Did they toy with it? Probably a flirt. Did they ask for more? Definitely drunk. Back in the monastery, sops had a different role. Wine-soaked bread was given to the sick, the elderly, and the dying. It was easy to digest, easy to swallow, and thanks to the wine, sometimes eased pain or helped sleep. A liquid lullaby with a bite. Even peasants got in on it in their own way. If you could get your hands on a bit of sour wine or cider-soaking old bread, made it not just edible again, but kind of enjoyable, less fancy, more functional, still oddly delicious. You finish the essop, letting the last crumbs dissolve against your tongue. It's decadent, silly, but also somehow familiar. Bread and booze, a timeless duo. A servant swoops in and refills your goblet before you can protest. This batch smells stronger, richer. You sip again. Warmer. A bit tipsy even. The bread's missing this time, and you don't mind. Across the table, someone drops their SOP, and it splashes dramatically. A servant rushes in with a cloth. Another noble giggles behind her fan. It's like a dinner party where the courses are liquid and the etiquette is melting. You notice a man scribbling something beside you, a scribe, a poet. He's murmuring about the velvet ghost of grape-stained bread. You nod, impressed and slightly concerned. This was food as social code. Every gesture meant something. Every flavor a symbol. Bread meant life. Wine meant wealth. Together they whispered, "I've arrived, and I'm damp." You rise, leaving your half-drunk goblet behind the spices humming in your chest. Around you the air is thicker now, sweeter, slower. Sops in wine don't fill your belly so much as float around your brain. A meal you remember more than you chew. The market is thinning. Torches sputter to life. Someone sings off-key in the distance and laughter trails into the dark. But your eyes are already pulled toward another stand. Simple, wooden, humble. Stacked high with raisins, figs, and dates that glisten like edible jewels. You smile. Time for medieval candy, but not the soft, safe kind. Because dried fruit back then, that was sugar with consequences. You follow the glint of sticky sunlight reflecting off wrinkled skins and honeyed flesh. And soon you're standing in front of a stall that might as well be a treasure chest turned inside out. Piles of raisins, heaps of figs, and bunches of dates shimmer like loot salvaged from a shipwreck. Welcome to the medieval candy shop, brought to you by nature sun-drying and an alarming lack of dental care. You pluck a raisin from a bowl and pop it into your mouth. Chewy, sweet, slightly grainy like it's hiding secrets. You chew again. It sticks to a molar like a guilty memory. You swallow slowly. This is not your average snack. Back then, dried fruit was more than just trail mix filler. It was a luxury, a reward, a sign you'd made it or at least knew someone who had. Figs from the south, dates from distant ports, raisins pressed from late harvest grapes. They weren't just food, they were edible status. And expensive. Sugar was rare. Honey helped. But to get sweetness in your day-to-day, you needed fruit, and fruit that wouldn't rot 3 minutes after harvest. So people dried it, hung it, pressed it between planks, set it near fire or sun, whatever it took to chase away the moisture and keep the flavor. Historians still argue whether dried fruit was more medicine or dessert. Some recipes mix figs with herbs for digestion. Others crush dates into pastes for spreading on bread. And some noble cookbooks casually suggest sprinkling saffron and rosewater on dried plums. Just in case you forgot how much more fun nobles were having, quirky fact-dried fruit was sometimes used as currency. A pound of imported dates could pay for a night's lodging, a decent blade, or a favor from someone whose boots didn't leak. Sweetness was serious business. You chew a fig next. It's rich, jammy, full of seeds that snap between your teeth like tiny fireworks, delicious and treacherous. Figs back then were often sun-dried without much cleaning, so every bite carried a surprise, a seed, a bit of grit, or if you were truly unlucky, a beetle husk. Crunch responsibly. Medieval folks didn't let this stop them. Dried fruit appeared on tables from peasant huts to palace feasts. It was chopped into meat dishes, stuffed into pies, folded into breads. A rare whole fig might be served on a silver platter at a royal banquet garnished with gold leaf. Yes, literal gold. For eating. Or pretending to. You try a date next. It's firm on the outside, soft in the middle. Syrupy but earthy. It tastes like sun patience and maybe a hint of camel. You don't ask questions. Around you, other market goers are loading up. A merchant carefully wraps raisins in cloth. A soldier buys a handful of figs and crams 3 into his mouth before walking off with the rest stuffed in his belt. One child clutches a date like it's his birthday. You overhear a noblewoman asking for the least sticky ones. Good luck, lady. And then there's the seeds. Every dried fruit back then came with a built-in obstacle course. No neat pitting, no seedless varietals. You chewed carefully, spat discreetly, or cracked a molar and blamed God. That didn't stop medieval cooks from getting creative. Some recipes call for dried fruit mashed with wine, spices, and breadcrumbs to make early versions of energy balls. Others were boiled in honey until they resembled candy. And some were just stuffed. One noble dish featured prunes filled with almond paste and dusted with sugar. A medieval bonbon, if you will, one that doubled as both dessert and dental test. You chew another fig and feel your jaw work overtime. You now understand why medieval portraits rarely show people smiling. Teeth were not something you flaunted if you valued your reputation or your gums. Still, there's something luxurious about it. The stickiness, the warmth, the sense that you're tasting something older than a recipe, older than a cookbook, older even than the baker. Dried fruit is ancient food. It's survived wars, famines, plagues. It's outlived kings. And here you are getting your fingers sticky like a child, sneaking raisins from the pantry. You finish your last date, fingers tacky and mouth buzzing with sugar. Your stomach is full, but not too full. Your spirit sweetened. You thank the vendor who nods and gestures to the sign above her stall. Sweetness that waits. Not a slogan. A warning. As you turn away, something darker catches your eye. A skillet, a puff of smoke, a smell like roasted iron and old stew. Meatballs gnaw rounder, heavier, blood pudding balls. You swallow hard, no turning back now. From sticky sweetness to fried courage. The sweet aftertaste of raisins clings to your tongue like a memory you're not ready to let go. But then you smell it. A heavy, earthy scent like iron and fat, and something faintly terrifying. You follow it, like someone investigating a noise in the cellar, already regretting it. There's a small iron pan set over flame, its surface shimmering with grease. Inside, spheres of dark meat sizzle, popping with little spits of oil. They're not pretty. They look like meteorites rolled in oats. The woman behind the pan sees your expression and grins. Blood pudding balls, she says proudly. Best eaten hot and brave. You nod with the kind of commitment usually reserved for sword duels. She hands you one on a stick. It's hot, dense, smells like bacon, got into a fight with oatmeal and lost. You bite in. It's crispy on the outside, soft and meaty inside. Rich, savory. Just the tiniest hint of blood and cinnamon. Yeah, that's blood. Welcome to the most medieval of snacks, blood pudding. Or more specifically, blood pudding in convenient, fare-friendly, deep-fried ball form. Everything about this snack screams practicality and defiance. In a time when no part of the pig went to waste, the blood became a bold ingredient, a mix of protein thrift and culinary courage. Combine it with oat sweat and spice, shape it into a ball. and fry it in pig fat. That's not just food. That's medieval energy. Historians still argue whether these blood balls were special occasion food or just part of everyday survival. Some say they were cooked during slaughter season October and November, when fresh blood was easiest to collect. Others claim they were sold at fairs and markets, especially in colder regions, as portable iron-rich snacks to warm up frozen villagers. Quirky fact: in some places, blood pudding was eaten to strengthen the blood itself. The logic was simple blood in blood strong. Not exactly how biology works, but it's very on brand for medieval medicine. You take another bite. The oats give it a kind of chewy stability like meatball meets porridge. The suet, the hard fat from around the kidneys, melts into everything, giving it a greasy, satisfying heft. The spices help. Nutmeg. Maybe black pepper. A hint of something sweet to keep your mouth guessing. And yes, it's a little alarming, but it's also kind of good. These weren't just snacks. They were fuel. Soldiers ate them. Farmers, miners. Anyone who needed calories that could punch back. Wrapped in cloth or shoved into bread, they made meals for travel work or winter survival. The shape made them perfect for tossing in a satchel or popping in your mouth like some meat-based dare. A boy next to you downs one in 2 bites, wipes his hand on his shirt, and grins through grease-slick teeth. His sister looks less impressed, picking hers apart with a stick to inspect the oat-to-blood ratio. You glance at the vendor's table. A wooden sign reads "Balls of Courage, 3 for a penny." No refunds. There's a pile of them cooling on a plate, and next to it a little dish of mustard sauce. You dip your next bite and the tang cuts through the richness like a noble through a village feast. You remember reading somewhere that blood dishes go back even further to the Romans, even the Celts. This isn't a medieval quirk. It's part of a much older tradition of not wasting a single part of an animal and turning blood into something this solid that's ingenuity and a little bit of culinary madness. The last bite is the best crispy edge, soft center, just enough chew. You swallow and your stomach rumbles its approval. It feels hearty, serious, like your belly is now wearing chain mail. Of course, not everyone in the medieval world loved blood pudding. Some religious texts warned against eating blood at all, citing ancient laws, but others embraced it wholeheartedly. Feast days, local festivals, even funerals, blood pudding balls made an appearance wherever people gathered and needed something bold enough to be remembered. You glance around. A man is buying a dozen and loading them into a leather pouch. A merchant is bartering 2 for a chunk of smoked eel. The air hums with fat and fire, and honestly, there's something comforting about it. In a world that demands you make do, make strange, and make everything count, blood pudding balls are a kind of edible anthem. Nothing goes to waste. Nothing gets ignored. Even the messiest parts of life can be shaped, spiced, and fried until they're a little easier to swallow. You finish the last crumb and thank the vendor who gives you a wink and a napkin the size of a playing card. It does nothing. Your fingers still shine like polished shields. You turn from the stall, your mouth still tasting of spice and iron. Ahead, a woman is flipping something flat and round on a griddle. The edges curl in greasy waves. She slaps one down onto a plank and hands it to a man who bites in and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like a prayer. It smells like breakfast, or maybe penance. You're about to meet the medieval pancake. The scent wafts toward you a heady blend of scorched lard, singed flour, and maybe just a little panic. You follow your nose and your curiosity to a round stone griddle where pancakes the size of your palm hiss and sputter in shimmering fat. The cook, a woman with arms like bread dough, and a face full of soot, flips them with a sharpened stick. One lands with a slap. Another curls into itself like it regrets being born. You take a step closer. She eyes you. Pancake, she asks, like it might be a challenge. You nod. She hands you one straight from the griddle. No plate, no garnish. Just hot, floppy, and slick with pork fat. You bite. It's chewy, uneven, a little scorched at the edges, and honestly, not bad. These were medieval pancakes, not the fluffy, syrup-soaked flapjacks of lazy brunches. These were tough, pan-fried lifelines. Batter made of flour water, maybe an egg if someone bribed a chicken. Fried in pig fat until the outside crackled and the inside remembered it used to be dough. Sometimes sweet, sometimes savory, always greasy. You chew and blink. It's hard to tell what flavor this is. There might be leeks, or maybe old apples. Could be onions, or nothing. And that's the magic of medieval pancakes. They were the duct tape of snack food. You could fold in anything leftover stew, stale fruit, questionable meat, or just a prayer. Historians still argue whether pancakes were considered festive or just practical. On feast days, they showed up sweetened with honey or stuffed with dried fruit. On regular days, they were more likely to be pan-scraped wheat globs seasoned with survival. Quirky fact, in some English towns, pancakes had their own races seriously. Women would run while flipping pancakes in pans, a strange blend of cooking and cardio. This tradition survives in places even today, a strange echo of medieval whimsy. The one you're holding curls at the edges. You tear off a piece. It's thinner in the center, almost translucent. The outer rim is crisp browned from a bit too long on the fire. You chew thoughtfully. The texture shifts with every bite, first soft, then toothy, then crunchy. This pancake has seen things. Medieval cooks didn't have non-stick pans or temperature control. Fire was uneven, pans were warped, and fat was often reused until it had the personality of a tavern bouncer. Making pancakes wasn't art, it was negotiation. The woman at the griddle ladles more batter. It sizzles violently. She tosses in a handful of chopped greens. Someone else gets a pancake with bits of salted fish. Another gets one dusted with honey. No two are the same. It's like pancake roulette. You finish yours. It lingers in your mouth, a film of lard and mystery. A bit of honey drips onto your sleeve. You're not even mad. In peasant homes, pancakes were often made on flat stones over open hearths. Quick, filling, and easy to share. No forks, no plates. Just grab, fold, and eat. Sometimes you dip them in broth. Sometimes you stack them with herbs. Occasionally you just hoped they weren't too burnt to chew. Nobles had their version too thinner, more refined, flavored with saffron or rose water, folded into elegant triangles and served with syrup. But even then, a pancake was still a pancake. Fried dough, universal, democratic, slightly greasy. You glance around. A boy nearby is using his as a napkin. A soldier bites his in half and slips the rest into a leather pouch. A dog licks a discarded corner from the dust. Pancakes are nothing if not versatile. The cook hands you another unsolicited. This one's darker, richer in smell. You bite in savory spiced, a hint of something meaty. Possibly blood sausage, possibly regret. You finish it anyway. There's a kind of comfort in their imperfection. Every pancake is a gamble. Some you'll remember fondly, some you'll remember medically, but all of them are honest. A fire, a handful of flour, a pan, a promise. She wipes her hands on her apron. Try to come back when the pig fat's fresh, she mutters. You nod solemnly. Your stomach is full but flexible. Your fingers shine with grease. And as the pancake haze fades, your eyes catch something impossibly delicate, thin, golden sheets stacked in a tin box, their edges stamped with patterns like church windows. You're about to meet the wafer, crispy, holy, edible paper that tastes like effort. You shuffle towards the glinting tin box, fingers still sticky with pancake grease, drawn to something entirely different, something delicate. There in the soft shadow of a church wall, a vendor in modest robes carefully lifts a golden disc no thicker than a leaf. It crackles gently in the breeze. He places it atop a tidy stack, each one stamped with what looks like a saint, a star, or perhaps a stylized fish. Wafers. Holy snack or edible paper, maybe both. You get handed one with 2 fingers like it's fragile treasure. It's warm from the sun, impossibly light, and smells faintly of wheat and old wood. You take a cautious nibble. The crunch is dry, crisp like an autumn leaf. The flavor is restrained, more texture than taste, like air that had ambitions. This is the minimalist of medieval munchies. No honey, no spice, no stuffing, just flour and water, maybe a bit of oil if you were lucky, pressed flat between patterned irons and baked until nearly translucent. Wafers weren't trying to impress you. They were trying not to break. They had roots in both the sacred and the street. In churches, they became communion hosts, blessed, revered, handled with ritual. But outside, they were snacks. Modest, fragile, sometimes sold just outside the very buildings where the consecrated versions were distributed. Historians still argue whether the secular wafers directly copied the holy ones or whether both evolved from older Roman unleavened breads. Either way, the line between sacred and snack got very thin and very crunchy. Quirky fact, some medieval wafer sellers had licenses from the church, allowing them to bake and sell outside cathedrals on feast days. Others operated in a more rogue fashion, which led to the occasional sermon about profane pastries distracting the faithful. You finish your first wafer. It vanishes in your mouth like paper left too long in the rain but crispier. You reach for another. This one's slightly thicker, with a cross-hatched design that leaves tiny ridges on your tongue. The vendor tells you the irons are carved by hand, each one unique. Some bear saints, some animals, some cryptic symbols passed down through generations of bakers who may or may not have understood them. The process is slow, finicky, and heartbreakingly prone to failure. Snap. A wafer cracks in the vendor's hands. He winces, then eats the mistake. You're offered a bundle carefully wrapped in a cloth tied with twine. These were often bought for travel. Long-lasting, stackable, easily slipped into satchels or tucked into pockets. They don't melt. They don't rot. They don't make demands. In noble homes, wafers were sometimes sweetened, dusted with sugar, or layered with dried fruit pastes. But even then, the wafer itself stayed plain. It was the blank canvas, the edible parchment, the humble stage upon which other flavors performed. Monasteries, too, took wafers seriously. Some orders had dedicated wafer rooms, complete with carved irons, stone ovens, and daily production schedules. Wafers were made with prayer and precision, and any imperfect batch usually fed to the chickens, or the monks, if they weren't picky. You watch a child try to bite a stack all at once. It shatters like glass flakes flying. He looks devastated. His mother looks amused. Nearby, another vendor dips his wafers in honey and lets them dry in the sun. Sticky, shiny, slightly golden, a fusion of practicality and decadence. They look like the sugary wings of an edible angel. You try one. It's better. Still restrained, but with a whisper of indulgence. And then there's the sound. Wafers don't crunch like other foods. They crackle, lightly, politely, like breaking a promise you didn't want to keep. No splatter, no drip, just a clean snap and a soft crumble. A passing pilgrim buys a stack and tucks them between pages of a book. You wonder if they're for eating or bookmarking. You crouch near the vendor and ask how long wafers keep. He shrugs. Depends on the air. If it's dry weeks, if it's wet hours. He taps the tin box. But these last. You take one final bite. It melts on your tongue like a communion between bread and breeze. No aftertaste, no residue, just a sense of having eaten something gentle. In a world of greasy fish skins, sticky fruits, and cakes hard enough to block arrows, the wafer is a whisper, a breath, a subtle punctuation mark in the noisy sentence of medieval cuisine. You dust off your fingers. The vendor nods a blessing and turns back to his irons. Across the market, something flashes like amber. Slices of fruit shimmer in syrup, arranged like jewels in crystal dishes. Oranges, dates, ginger. You're pretty sure they're humming. It's time to meet Sucket. Candied, treasure-boiled ambition and the final word in fancy. The market's glow has dimmed to a soft, syrupy light. Fires burn low. Songs turn into hums. And you find yourself drawn toward the stall that glitters. Not with gold, but with sugar. Thick, glassy slices of citrus glisten in crystal bowls. Slivers of ginger look like polished amber. Dates gleam with a dark, rich sheen. This is not food for travel. This is food for display, for indulgence, for sucking on slowly while someone reads you poetry. This is Sucket. Even the name sounds sticky. It comes from the old French sucadi, meaning preserved fruit in syrup, and it's the apex predator of medieval sweets. If dried fruit was candy, with consequences, Sucket was sugar with swagger. The vendor, a man in embroidered sleeves and the kind of smug mustache you could twirl for hours, gestures toward his offerings with a silver spoon. Ginger boiled in rosewater, orange peels candied with cloves, pear slices soaked in cinnamon syrup. For refined palates, only he purrs, handing you a tiny dish like you've just been knighted. You try a piece of candied orange first. Your teeth meet light resistance before sinking into something soft, perfumed, and shockingly sweet. It tastes like the sun, if the sun had been soaked in perfume and set on a sugar throne. This is not peasant fare. Sucket was the delicacy of nobles and royalty, often served at the end of an already lavish feast. And unlike most medieval food, which was about survival, stretchiness, or at least some practicality, Sucket had only one purpose: joy. You try a piece of ginger next. It's fiery sharp but mellowed by sugar. It hums down your throat like a warm laugh. The vendor offers you a candied date, which you accept without hesitation. It's sticky dense, almost intoxicating. Historians still argue whether Sucket was primarily a medicinal treat or a straight-up luxury. Some claimed it aided digestion, soothed the stomach, and balanced humors after heavy meals. But others insist that's just what people said to justify their sugar habit. Quirky fact: Sucket was so beloved in Tudor England that special dishes called sucket pots were made from silver or fine pottery just to serve it. They had tiny tongs and spoons, so your noble fingers wouldn't get sticky, because sticky fingers were for peasants. The fruits used were often imported, or rare lemons from the south, dates from North Africa, ginger from the east, and the sugar. That was the real extravagance: cane. Sugar boiled down into syrup, then reduced again into a thick, glossy bath that turned humble fruit into treasure. You glance around. A young noblewoman plucks a sliver of pear from a bowl and places it delicately on her tongue, eyes closed. Nearby, a merchant pretends not to cry after tasting a clove-spiked plum. Sucket doesn't just satisfy, it transforms. It's slow food. Contemplative food. You don't scarf Sucket while running from pigs or hauling firewood. You sit. You nibble. You let your tongue do the work. It's the dessert equivalent of being fanned with peacock feathers. And for nobles, it was a way to show off. Look at my imported ginger, my rare orange peels, my syrup thicker than your excuses. Even the act of serving it on ornate platters with tiny utensils was part of the ritual. But Sucket wasn't all flash. In some ways, it was a medieval version of fruit preservation. Candying kept fruit edible for months. And in a world where fresh fruit was seasonal and often scarce, Sucket was how you tasted summer in January. a little edible time machine. You take one more bite, this time of candied lemon peel. It zings, tart bright, chased by syrup that clings to your lips like a whisper. You lick your fingers. No one judges. The vendor refills your dish, then hands you a cloth to wipe your hands, embroidered with a small fig motif. Fancy until the end. You lean back on a crate, cheeks warm with sugar. Around you, the market has slowed. Stalls are closing. Fires are reduced to embers. The hum of voices is softer now, more intimate. You hear laughter, a lute, the distant whistle of someone walking home. And then you see it. One last stall, unassuming. A man lowers something into oil, long, slippery, definitely not a pasty. Fried eel. The last, most slippery chapter in tonight's snack saga. But for now, you linger in the sweetness. Sucket coating your teeth, clinging to your thoughts, leaving behind a final indulgent echo of medieval joy. The last coals of the evening glow beneath iron grates as your feet take you almost hypnotically towards a final stall. No sugar, no honey, no spices, just the unmistakable smell of something once aquatic and currently sizzling in oil. A man in a soot-smudged tunic leans over a bubbling cauldron, pulling out long curled pieces of meat with a hooked stick. They drip, they hiss, they shimmer with a glaze of fat and crisped skin. You step closer, trying not to look too eager or too uncertain. The man sees you. He grins. Fried eel, he says. Fresh this morning. Mostly bones, but we call that texture. He plops one onto a plank, dusts it with something herbal, and hands it over like he's bestowing a challenge. You stare at it for a moment. It's coiled like a sleepy snake, edges golden skin, bubbled and crisp. You take a bite. It cracks, then yields to a rich, oily softness beneath. Fishy, yes, but not in the way you feared. It's meaty, dense, and deeply savory. A little chewy, a lot intense. This is no humble snack. This is the eel beloved, bizarre, and bewilderingly popular across the medieval world. Eels were everywhere. Rivers, lakes, estuaries. They were fast to grow, easy to trap, and required no fancy feeding. For peasants, they were a cheap and plentiful protein. For nobles, they were a delicacy, especially when shaped into pies, jellied into terrines, or served with spices no one could pronounce. But fried, that was the everyman's eel. Cleaned, chopped, dipped in flour, and lowered into hot fat until it curled into a crispy spiral. No frills, just fire oil, and enough bones to make your gums work overtime. Historians still argue whether eels were more important as food or currency. Some areas use them in rent payments. Others had eel-specific festivals. Monks kept eel ponds. Kings demanded eels in tribute. At one point, it's estimated England alone consumed millions of eels a year. Quirky fact eels were so vital that some medieval monasteries had eel counting days, literally. They'd tally their stocks like bankers, counting coins, noting sizes, and recording slipperiness ratings. Probably not the official term, but should have been. You chew another bite, carefully navigating the bones. They're fine, hair-like, not dangerous if you know what you're doing, or lucky. You imagine the average medieval diner wasn't dainty about it. Bite, chew, swallow, hope. The flavor deepens as you go smoky fatty, a little bitter at the charred tips. There's no glaze, no sauce, but a sprig of something green lies on top. Parsley, sage. You pretend to taste it and feel sophisticated. Nearby, an old woman sucks on a piece of eel like it holds secrets. A child tries to twirl one on a stick. A man leans on a barrel gnawing on a piece, while discussing field taxes like it's just another snack, not a small aquatic dragon. And monks. Oh, monks loved eel, especially during Lent when meat was banned, but fish was fair game. Eel counted as fish barely, so they ate it with enthusiasm, fried, stewed, baked into pies the size of helmets. Some monasteries even had eel breeding programs, more detailed than their prayer schedules. You take another bite, this time with commitment. The skin crackles, the meat gives, and you finally understand. Eel isn't just food. It's an experience, a test, a reward. It doesn't ask for approval, it dares you, and somehow you're into it. You glance around the quieting market. The sucket is packed away. The wafers boxed. The pancake woman naps on a crate. But the eel man's still frying, still humming to himself as he turns each slippery coil in oil like it's a lullaby. He sees your empty plank and nods. Want another? You pause. You're full, sticky, tired, but also oddly thrilled. Yes, you say, surprising even yourself, because this is it. The last crunch, the final sizzle. Fried eel, strange, savory, ancient, closing the curtain on your medieval snack parade. You sit on a worn stone eel in hand and take your time, and as the stars begin to blink overhead, as the market settles into shadows and ash, you savor each bite, bones, oil, skin, and all knowing that sometimes the weirdest foods leave the deepest impressions. This isn't just a snack, it's a memory now, one you'll taste again in dreams. The last bite of eel disappears into your mouth, and suddenly everything slows. The chatter fades, the firelight dims, and the market, the chaos, the grease, the joy, gently recedes behind your closing eyes. You don't stand up. You just lean back, belly-full limbs, heavy brain buzzing with syrup and smoke. This is the aftertaste of history. And here, as the embers die and the wind cools, your thoughts turn to something quieter, something softer, dreams. In the medieval world, food didn't just fuel the body. It touched the spirit. It crept into visions. It shaped how people slept and what they believed came in the dark. A belly full of eel or a sop soaked in wine might mean more than just indigestion. It might be a key to another world. People once believed certain foods brought on dreams. Spiced wine could open the mind. Bread soaked in herbs might quiet your soul. And some meals, heavy, strange, or blessed, were said to bridge the space between waking and sleeping, to invite visions, to tempt angels or demons. You lie there, eyes shut now, fingers still scented with sugar and smoke, and imagine it a monk fasting for days, taking his evening sop and seeing saints in the rafters. A noblewoman sipping her mulled wine and dreaming of the sea. A soldier nibbling dried fruit before bed, only to wake convinced he'd seen a future battle in his sleep. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were spiritual truths or just early nutrition science wrapped in superstition. But in a time when the line between the divine and the daily was paper thin, who could say what caused a dream? Was it the food, the prayer, the candle, or some mysterious mix of everythings? Quirky fact: some medieval dream books listed which foods to eat or avoid before bed. Eat leeks, dream of war. Eat honey, dream of love. Eat eel. Well, that was anyone's guess. And then there was beer. Not just a drink, but a way of life. In villages and cities across Europe, beer flowed more freely than water. It was safer sometimes, cheaper, and always present. Morning beer, workin' beer, supper beer, bedtime beer. Some said beer helped bring restful sleep. Others claimed it carried messages from the gods if brewed with the right herbs. Hops for calm, sage for wisdom, wormwood for visions you might not want. In taverns, the final drink of the night wasn't just a toast, it was a ritual. A way to end the day and ease into whatever came after. In dreams, in thoughts, in silence, you exhale slowly. The air smells faintly of yeast and distant apples. Someone's singing a lullaby in Breton. Or maybe they're just drunk. Either way, the melody drifts over you like fog. Tonight you've walked the aisles of medieval delight. You've eaten cheese curds that squeak, fritters fried in oil with a death wish, blood puddings that stared back. You've sopped, you've cracked, you've crunched, and now in the hush that follows feast and fire you rest. Not just fed, but woven into the fabric of a world long gone. One where snacks were spells and kitchens smelled like courage. Because that's the secret, isn't it? History doesn't live in textbooks. It lives in taste, in burnt crusts and sticky fingers, in laughter around carts, in the moment someone hands you a hot pie and you don't ask what's inside. So close your eyes. Let the market fade. Let the eel settle. Let the bread and wine become soft dreams. You've tasted time. And time, it turns out, tastes pretty great. And now, the market dims. The fires have softened to embers. The music fades into scattered hums, and laughter rolls like smoke into the night air. Your feet ache, your hands smell faintly of bread lard and sweet syrup. You've tasted the chaos and comfort of medieval snacking. Each bite a memory, each flavor a quiet rebellion against hunger and time. You pass the last stall. The vendor is packing up, slowly humming a tune that might be a lullaby or just the sound of a day closing in peace. A dog yawns near a pile of straw. Children are curled by the fire bellies, full fingers sticky. The air carries a hint of spice like cinnamon left behind on wooden spoons. You pause, close your eyes. Let the aftertaste linger, a wisp of fennel, a smear of honey, a whisper of wine-soaked bread on your tongue. It's enough. The clatter is gone now. The night wraps around the village like a blanket, and every smell, every crunch, every soft chew of a wafer dissolves into memory. You breathe in and out, slow, deep. Let it all soften. There's nothing more to taste, nothing left to chase, just you, a full belly, a quiet world, and the warm echo of laughter flickering behind shuttered windows. Sleep well, traveler. You've eaten your way through history, and now let it rest with you. Good night.